Mornings are better with a warm beverage, even for Latter-day Saints. Meet Postum, the ideal coffee alternative and proud sponsor of This Week in Mormons podcast. Spotted on the coffee aisle at Smith's Grocery or at your local nearby store. Can't locate it? No worries. Order it at postum.com. Explore delicious recipes to tailor your Postum experience. Start your day off right with Postum.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to This Week in Mormons. We have a special guest with us for our interview this week.
Is it me? Is it me?
It is not you, Melissa.
It's not
You're here with me all the time.
It's a new special guest. Yeah.
That's right. Josh, why don't you introduce yourself? We have Josh Randall. I'm going to introduce you as somebody who is running for the U.S. Senate for the state of Utah as a Republican. Is that right?
That's correct. And I guess you could introduce me as a father of 6 kids that are under the age of 10, or the first counselor in my Sunday school presidency. Wow. It's funny. We went to an event in Emery County about 3 months ago or 4 months ago when we filed with the FEC, and it was the first time. This is the first time I've run for office. And I've tried to be a delegate. I've been a delegate before. I made some minor incursions into the political world. But as I went to this event in Emery County, I kind of started off with a joke that my wife and I have thought about running for office. We've seen that I don't have a very busy calling in our ward, so we figured we run for U.S. Senate.
Josh, I'm glad that you said that because I didn't want to be the one to say it, but first counselor in the Sunday school presidency used to be known as the bell ringer. We don't even really ring bells anymore.
That's right.
I also want to tell you, though, as a slight warning, that was the last calling my husband had was first counselor in the Sunday school presidency. Mm-hmm. And it was the sweetest gig of his whole life. But he made the mistake of letting everybody know it was the sweetest gig of his whole life. And shortly thereafter, we got called to a YSA bishopric. So I'm just saying, if you love the calling, you might want to keep it on the down low how sweet it is. That's all I'm saying.
I thought you were going to end that story with, and now he's a U.S. Senator for the state of Utah.
And now he's a U.S. Senator for the state of Utah. You're right. That would have been a better ending. Josh, tell us about the 6 kids. That's wow. How you doing that?
Well, I've got a wife who's a superhero, as you can imagine. But
and a hottie. I told her that earlier. She's a hottie.
I agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah. It's we have an interesting past. We both came from big families and wanted to have big families. We got a late start, so people sometimes think we're crazy, but we were already. I was 31, she was 26. We were pretty well established. I had done a master's degree in accounting and was a CPA working in oil and gas accounting, and my wife was a sign language interpreter. She's nationally certified. She's really good at it. If you actually watch some of the debates that have happened in the last couple of years, like Mike Lee when he was debating Evan McMullen, you'll see my wife Brianna down in the corner doing the ASL interpreting for those debates. I think she actually did at least 1 or 2 of theirs, Evan McMullen and Mike Lee.
That must have been quite a workout because they were going back and forth quite a lot. And they had a lot to say in those debates.
Yeah, and I think for her, there's, she obviously has her own political views, and she has a husband who has obviously his own political views. And so when she goes to do those, it's kind of, she's supposed to be neutral, and you'll watch the facial expressions that she puts into it. She kind of has to be careful to say, I'm not going to misinterpret and send the message that I like one more than the other. I'm just here to interpret what they're doing.
Yeah.
So
how did you guys meet then with those 2 different paths?
Well, I mean, and I've said this on the campaign trail, actually, I was one who at age 21, I believed in trying to, I was actively pursuing finding somebody,
Because your mission president told you to?
Well, I think he encouraged it for sure.
Yeah, that's a standard story, right?
Yeah, I think, but my stake president too, when I got back, I think he said something to the effect of, you need to be going on regular dates and he might have challenged us to do one a week. I probably did that for 10 years.
Wow.
I would say that I probably went on 500 dates
Oh,
with
wow.
350 different people,
Oh, wow.
which is
wow.
kind of a weird story in a lot of ways. But
Well, or you have 350 potential people voting for you.
I guess
that's enough. That's all he needs.
Yeah, I don't imagine some of them would, but
Well, so real quick, Josh. So were you at BYU? Were you at a church school, or were you at a non-church school when you were doing all this dating?
Well, I went to Utah State, and that's where I was doing some of it. And then I went to Weber State for a master's degree. So I did a bachelor's and a master's, both in accounting, at Utah State and Weber State. Brianna went to BYU. She has an associate's degree in sign language interpreting, and she also has a bachelor's degree in family and human development. And so we didn't cross paths during our college years. And at about age 26 or 7, I took a job with ConocoPhillips out in Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
Oh, I know where that is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that would make not very many people who do, but at least in Utah.
Matt spent a lot of time in the Midwest.
That makes 2 of us in Utah that know that area. But but I actually really liked Bartlesville. It was a great experience there. And ConocoPhillips was a good place to work. I didn't have a super long stay there, but I ended up working with the ONRR after about a year, 13 or 14 months at ConocoPhillips. I jumped around a little bit. I don't know if you know much about oil and gas, but it's a pretty volatile industry. When the commodity prices go down, you might find it administrative type employees being laid off. So I've been a part of some layoffs over the years, and it's caused a little bit of jumping around. But I spent some time in Farmington, New Mexico. I've been in Oklahoma.
Wow.
And I was actually in Farmington, New Mexico, working for the Office of Natural Resources Revenue when Brianna and I met. We courted from 6.5 hours away. She was living in Orem, Utah at the time, working after her bachelor's degree. And I'm kind of ashamed almost to say this, but I got her number off ldssingles.com.
Okay.
It works.
Yeah, and it's funny. I told some people in my family, I said, she didn't respond. I just wrote her something. I wasn't one to do internet dating. I was one to say, I read her profile. I looked at her pictures and I said, I think I could marry her if she would write me back. And so she wrote back and said something like, hey, I think I'm kind of dating somebody and I'm not really interested. My profile is still up, but now's probably not a good time. About a week later, I tried back.
Good for you.
And I said it again. And I said, hey, have you cut that off yet? Have you cut that off with the other guy yet? And she said, I think she kind of thought it was humorous and said, well, if you want to try to give me a call, then here's my number. I guess you could take me out on a date or something, but I'm still kind of thinking I might date this other guy. And I said, well, that's okay. If you give me some time, and then I'll see if I can't convince you. And I did take time. I took her to Lagoon. I think we went to Rumby Island Grill afterwards. The only time in my life a first date went for over 10 hours. I mean, this was like, I had driven up from Farmington, New Mexico, and I knew I wanted to try and make something happen out of it. So I took as much time as I could get with her, and it was an interesting story. The next day, I tried to take her to lunch before I went back to Farmington the next morning, and she didn't respond, and it was a major bummer. But apparently
this girl is hard to get.
She was.
Yeah.
Apparently her phone had problems, and she didn't get my messages. I think I called and texted her, and she texted later and called me back that night and said, hey, I'm sorry, I would have gone to lunch with you again, but I didn't know. But anyway, that was the start of it. And then I said, okay, I actually had a date with somebody else set up. As you know, I mean, I was going on dates every week.
Right. You were working the program.
And after she responded, though, with this, after the first date, I wasn't sure if she was going to get back with me, but she did respond, and I canceled the other ones. And I said, I've been on one date with this girl. I'd like to see what we can make happen after. I know it sounds ridiculous, but
no, it sounds very classic LDS romance. That's what it sounds like.
And it was.
I have a question about that, Josh. Like, that is a lot of dating, having it not turn into marriage. And I pursued my wife, I would say, for maybe 6 or 7 months. And I was just like torn up inside. I was like, I can't do this. Like, this dating game is awful. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, like, how did you deal with the rejection? And like, what made you say, I'm going to stick with this, even though it just seemed to take forever?
I tell you, I mean, it's kind of a personal question in a lot of ways, but, I was the type of person who I leaned a lot on family. I was constantly trying to fill my life with other good things as well. Mm-hmm. And the girls that I took out, I always tried to take out people who had the same values, who could be a good fit, even if I didn't feel like they would be necessarily somebody I thought that I would want to marry. They were the type. And so I tried to take out the type that I wanted to marry, even if I didn't feel like there was a chemistry. Mm-hmm. And I guess I kind of figured that if I kept taking out the right type, the hope that I had was sooner or later, I would find one that I was really interested in that also was interested in me. And miracle of miracles, I guess. I mean,
it happened. Well, I think that's good advice. Like I mentioned, we serve in a young single adult ward, and it is really difficult to, for some of them, to stay in the church when they're not having success with the thing that the church places so much importance on, which is family, right? Like that's our whole goal, really, is to create families and return to God together. And it's really hard to keep pursuing the church when you feel like kind of hopeless in that manner. I've seen that with a lot of them. But I think the advice you give is good, is to keep family close, and then to just kind of keep pursuing those things that are important. Like, I think that's good advice. But I do think it shows a lot of persistence, because I don't think that's as easy as you make it sound. Like, I think that's a long time to do that hard thing. So I think that's impressive.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know. I mean, I'd say, if I was giving advice to anybody else in those shoes, that keep the church in the loop as well. I mean, for me, there's a lot of good bishops along that path in Oklahoma, in Farmington, New Mexico, and in Utah, in different areas of Utah. And I'll tell you, it's your ward family, it's your direct family, your siblings, your parents. Keep them all in the loop, I say. And it's I hope that people don't have the idea that, pushing the church aside or pushing family members aside. I think that kind of compounds the problem. Or at least it would have for me. So,
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, Josh, because I'm a political scientist, and I do a little bit of research about political ambition. And so just to preface this, like, it's pretty consistent that 85% of Americans have no interest in running for public office. And there's about 14% that say, yeah, maybe I would if everything worked out just right. And there's only like 1% that actually run for office. And so in that way, Josh, you're a little bit unusual from the rest of America. And so I got to know, like, why in the world are you doing this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I hear you. I mean, my dad has asked the same thing. He looked at me and said, Josh, I'm not even sure if you'd have my vote if you ran. And, maybe that's a confession I shouldn't make.
No. Family's the hardest to win over. They're always the hardest.
Well, I think he looks at it. He looks at it and says, if you're somebody who's going to stick through with it and you have a chance of being competitive, but I think he likes my platform. He kind of looks at this as are you serious? Are you really running for U.S. Senate? I mean, who does that, son?
Yeah.
But, no, I think he's on board now, and my mom's been more so on board probably in the beginning, but they're both on board at this point. And
your wife's your campaign manager, yes?
My wife is my campaign manager, and that's a big part of why I would do this. I'll tell you, if it wasn't for her personality with this and her skills that she has, we are kind of an open couple. I mean, I guess you maybe glean a little bit of that with us sharing our past and kind of where we're coming from. But she's very well built for this. I mean, she was a returned missionary. She went to the Washington, D.C. mission, Spanish speaking. I thought it was funny. On our honeymoon, we were in San Diego, and we went to a church ward there that was a deaf ward, and the speaker was speaking Spanish, which was interesting. So the person up there interpreting was like, "Oh no, I don't speak Spanish." And my wife was sitting in the side with me, and she's like, she got her attention.
I got you.
So she was taking the Spanish speaker and putting into sign language for the sign language interpreter to send it to the audience from her seat.
Wow.
It was really interesting. But that's her personality. She is really, she's ambitious. She's very missionary minded. She's very, in a lot of ways, I feel like this is like a mission. I mean, and to be honest with you, I mean, our outlook is, I love what my mission president said to me. He gave some advice probably just 2 or 3 years ago. We had him over for dinner, maybe a year ago. And he said, "Josh, whatever you do in your marriage, here's some marriage advice and life advice. Do it the Lord's way." And that's really the approach that we try and take with what we're doing as a Senate candidate, is to try and do it the Lord's way. And that way for me feels a lot like being a missionary in a lot of ways. And so in that sense, I've really enjoyed a lot of the interactions. It's not fun when you run into people who disagree with you on spending issues and social issues. It's not always fun to have those discussions, but we, I guess my motivation for getting in the race, one is that I have a wife who was totally on board with it. I would never have done it if she wasn't. Never would have done it. But two is that, as a CPA, father of 6 little kids, and somebody who's, I guess we talk a lot about faith, family, and fiscal discipline as being our platform. I'm one who believes that we need a certain type of experience and a certain type of voice that's a little bit different. I speak different than a lot of the other candidates. This is our first time running for office, and I think we could use that. If I didn't feel like we could help the cause, then I wouldn't be in the race, obviously, and I guess every other candidate would probably say the same thing, but we don't know that we're going to be getting more than 2% of the vote. I mean, 2% is what the Deseret News showed in the last poll that they ran. I mean,
well, that's way more than the former girls you dated. Melissa was way off on those numbers.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Now, Josh, I do have something to say about that, okay? And I don't know if you can control this, but when I searched, just my basic search, Josh Randall, U.S. Senate, the first thing that popped up was John Curtis for U.S. Senate.
He can't control that.
You can't control that. There's something in the analytics that's not helping you. That's one thing I want to say.
That's called advertising dollars, Melissa.
Well, it could be web search optimization that he's, I would say that, Brad Wilson is paid about $1.5 million as of December 31st. John Curtis, I think, has paid hundreds of thousands. I mean, we've paid $300 for a website and a $30 filing fee to build a not-for-profit. And then we've spent $1,350 for the state of Utah filing fee.
Wow.
And that's pretty much it.
Josh, I'll say when I talk to my children, so my kids are young adults. They're all new voters, 3 of them between the ages of 18 and 25. So they're all brand new voters, but they're very interested in politics, which I think is common for their generation. But whenever I talk to them, this is one of their biggest complaints, is that you have to have a lot of money in order to win an election. And, I think their generation gets really frustrated with the fact that, a normal, ordinary person can't really have much success, that you have to be a self-made, millionaire in order to actually get any traction. I think that's a problem.
Well, I do think that the system has kind of made it feel, it kind of seems to favor people who are professional fundraisers or people who are kind of no remorse salesmen. I mean, it's an interesting the way the system runs right now, it's kind of a who can get their name out through the most mediums, and some of those mediums are expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm one who probably would advocate for capping the amount that we spend on elections. Each candidate maybe spends $200,000 in a Senate race and maybe $100,000 in a House race. I think that would really change the dynamic to have something like that in place. But they're right now in Utah, there's a movement to try and kind of get rid of there's a signature path and a convention path if you're running for one of the parties. The Republican convention path essentially will take 4,100 delegates from the whole state who are coming from precincts. You're probably familiar with, maybe you're not familiar with this, but they're almost like your ward boundaries, so to speak, but your neighborhoods. And, I do still have some hope in that system. Right now, I mean, we've talked to hundreds, and Brianna has texted thousands. In fact, she's probably almost texted every one of them one at a time, which is ironic. She's amazing. She is an amazing campaign manager. But she really reaches out to them, and we feel very optimistic that the people in this race right now being favored by the delegates are actually not the ones that are spending the most. They're a little bit lower down. And most of that, I mean, a lot of that has to do with the type of people, I guess, maybe that become delegates. They're pretty politically active. And if they're doing the Republican primary, they're pretty into the Republican ideals. Ideals like a smaller government and the proper role of government being kind of what's spelled out in the Constitution. I think we kind of have a divide amongst the Democrats and Republicans. One maybe feels a little more inclined to have social programs by the federal government, and the other's more inclined to say, hey, smaller government and encourage more by not-for-profits and churches. But so I think that amongst the delegates, that specific portion of Republicans, I think that in this specific race, a lot of them like Trent Staggs, a lot of them like Carolyn Phippen, and we feel like a lot of them like us as well, like what we're saying. And that's, if I was to put it in a broader scale, you would find a lot more of your Mike Lee Republicans. I don't know if that's a good thing to say or a bad thing to say on this, but
everybody knows who that is, right? It's a good way to describe them.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Mike Lee Republicans amongst the delegates.
Okay.
And a few more Mitt Romney ones you'd find here in Salt Lake County or Davis County. But generally speaking, through the convention process, I still think there's a very realistic path to get on the ballot. Now, getting on the ballot is one thing, but there are going to be signature gatherers that are going to be competing on June 25th for the actual Republican primary. But I think this year, unique to what happened in 2018 with Mitt Romney and a guy named Mike Kennedy who won a convention, we don't really have a national name like Mitt Romney on the ticket,
right?
Who has been the former nominee for president for the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And, that along with the fact that there's going to be 3 or 4 of them who are a little bit more moderate or a little more, a little less conservative probably than some of the other candidates who might win in convention. I think that it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, there's just enough window that the person at convention, I think, has a really good shot of winning this year. And I know that the Republican Party is very much committed to backing the convention winner as well.
Well, that's good.
That's good.
And so once you have the party support as well, it
really, really helps.
There's a good probability that the convention winner will end up being the senator this year.
So now, Josh, I gotta ask you this question, because my feminist friends will kill me if I don't, because your wife Brianna sounds like an amazing Senate candidate. So I imagine at some point you're having a conversation around the table about which of us should run, or maybe you never had that conversation.
We have had that conversation.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I've said that to her. I said, Brianna, I mean, how do you feel about this? I mean, it's like to go out and be in the spotlight and say, you don't get a whole lot of recognition. You don't get to, I mean, sometimes, whatever fame and pomp and whatever type of recognition that somebody gets, the spouse has to kind of bear a lot of the burden for it. And I said, she's interesting. I don't know how I would do with it as well as she does, but I think that generally speaking, she's had the sentiment of, Josh, I would not want to do this. I wouldn't want to do it myself personally, but she's been as supportive as a spouse could be, in my opinion. I don't think anybody could be more supportive of me doing it, which is ironic. So even though she's, from what I could tell, and if she was in the room, I'd have her tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that she would confirm that she doesn't want to be the one on the stage. And I'm okay with that. I don't know if that I'm really trying to seek being on the stage either. I would probably try and be a senator who is pushing issues very hard, but I also see it as this is a job I'd do this for 6 to 12 years, and then I'd go home and go back to what I'm doing, and try and do as much as I can in those 6 to 12 years to fix as many problems as I can help fix.
Okay.
Sorry,
Matt.
No, go ahead.
So Mitt Romney and Mike Lee are both known, not just in Utah, but across the United States, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? Like that is part of what people see when they look at them. And I think, Josh, it's kind of interesting / cool that the first thing in your platform, you said faith, family, and fiscal responsibility. I think it's interesting that you're putting faith out there. And like you said, you feel like this is important in the way that a mission is. Does that feel scary to say like faith is the first part of my platform, or what? Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, it might sound a little different than some of the other candidates.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you that the Hispanics, Republicans of Utah, they say faith and family in their logo. We have a group of friends in the Tongan community here in Salt Lake that reached out to us, and they have a very similar perspective of, I think that really was a draw for them. They say, hey, we want to have somebody who has those values as well. And they've been actually putting together flyers and doing some work to try and help us with our campaign as well. You might see some of the stuff that they're doing down the road. I don't know. But for me, it's I look at our state constitution and the constitutions, excuse me, of every state in this country, as well as our federal Declaration of Independence and Constitution. Every one of them alludes to God in one way or another. And I am convinced that this is a unique and integral part of our country that makes it different than the rest of the world. And that may not be popular with some people, but it is in our founding documents. I mean, as church members, if you read in Doctrine and Covenants 134, or if you read in different parts, I mean, we believe that there were men and women who had been, if you will, guided by the Spirit to do certain things to help create a land that would have the liberties and the freedoms that the United States has. And I do believe in a divinely inspired constitution. And I guess that is actually one of the top motivations I had for running as well, is just the type of narrative that people have around faith. And I have said before that I feel like the separation of church and state, which isn't a constitutional phrase, but it's kind of run wild in some ways.
Right.
And I've had a lot of people say to me things like, I mean, a couple of years ago, we had a marijuana initiative on the ballot here in Utah. And I think we actually had some in the church. We probably had the area presidency or the first presidency saying, hey, we'd urge you to oppose this measure. We don't think it's the right way for us to do things in Utah. And I had some friends who said, well, I don't smoke pot, I don't smoke marijuana, and I don't use it for my different, medicinal or other purposes, but I'm not going to force my beliefs on other people. So I'm not going to vote against this bill because I believe in agency and I don't want to force my values, my religion, on other people. And for me, that is a real misunderstanding. I consider that a misinterpretation of the separation of church and state. And one of the things that I say on the campaign trail is I would much rather see people from all the religions living their religions and voting according to the values of their religion than to see the kind of moral relativist secularism take over and become our state religion for the United States.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a real push, that religious discussion doesn't have a place in the public sphere. And I'm not saying that we need to go and have, that every policy that we make, we need to be invoking the name of deity as part of the policy. I'm not saying that we need to have a state religion. I'm not implying that obviously
you're not saying that faith needs to be your faith.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it needs to be my faith,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think, we have dozens of great religions, and I would far rather I would say this to a Muslim, I would say this to a Christian person, I'd say this to a Methodist, a Presbyterian, a Catholic, an LDS person. All of them, I would say, please don't shelf your faith when you go to the ballot box. Don't shelf your faith in the public sphere. I am one who believes that we kind of need miracles right now in D.C., and I say this on the campaign trail a lot. I guess people watching here haven't heard me say it, but it's a popular phrase here in Utah that faith precedes miracles. And in some ways, I'm looking to go and perform miracles in DC. And I believe in them. I mean, I talk about knocking on 99 doors when I need to try and bring people to the other side. But there has to be some truth. There has to be some common ground. And there has to be people who can speak, who can turn the narrative into the right type of language to bring people over to the right side. It's a great thing to compromise, but if you're compromising to pass bad laws, or if you're compromising on core values, then the compromise loses its value. And for me, there are things that I wouldn't compromise on. From a moral perspective, I can't vote for $7 trillion of appropriations when we only have $5 trillion of revenue each year. That's a moral imperative that I feel to my children. Or to say, we had one with the Respect for Marriage Act, about 18 months ago, and the church has made various statements on this act. And one of the things that Elder Oaks talked about of why the church supported the amendments in that act, I understand from an organizational standpoint, and I think the church is very wise in the way that it approaches it. For me, as a senator, I still probably wouldn't have voted for that. I can say, not probably, I wouldn't have voted for it still. I think there is a teaching function in the law, and somewhere in that codification of redefining marriage after 6,000 years of our world's history to include the relationship of people of the same gender. The narrative that I would change is that doesn't mean that I don't love the LGBTQ community. I think it's the opposite. I think that what it means is I am firmly committed to the idea that the best outcomes for the next generation are coming from homes where a mom and a dad, a mother and father, are staying together, and they're both involved in the children's lives and committed to each other with total fidelity. And I think the social sciences and the history for 6,000 years in all societies have shown that this is a cornerstone building block foundation for a successful country, is to have families that are strong. And so for me, that's the discussion I would have around that point, that it has nothing really to do with a distaste or dislike for people at all. I have all kinds of sympathy for people who struggle with same-gender attraction, and I understand that it's I've actually been to the Pride Center here in Salt Lake City. I've tried to kind of talk with them about how I can help them as a senator. And I've reached out to multiple people to get that type of input. But for me, that's a core value. That is a core value that for me is very important. I think families have got to be strong. They've got to be strong right now.
Yeah. So I think that it's important for people to represent their values, right? So some people would say, if you say they struggle with same-sex attraction, they would say, I'm not struggling with it. I embrace it. That's my life. That's who I am. That's how I want to live. And the challenge I think we often face in society is that there's one version of how society should be, and it often seems to be in direct opposition to another version of how society ought to be. And it seems like if one side wins, the other side loses. And I think that that's one of our biggest challenges as a country right now is, like, if you're elected senator for the state of Utah, you represent everybody in the state of Utah, not just the people who agree with your perspective. How do you negotiate that to say, I might disagree with your definition of marriage or life, but I have an obligation to represent you? How do you do that?
Well, it's not easy. I mean, it's a pluralistic society that we live in. And to be honest, with 3.338 million people in Utah, I don't think you do. I don't think you do. I think that if you were to go around and ask people in the state, you'll find that many of them really have a distaste for Mike Lee or his policies. If you were to do the same type of rounds and go to the same communities, you'll also find people who have a real distaste for Mitt Romney or his policies as well. And so you're not going to please everybody. It doesn't seem like all the time, but you really have to do the research. You have to do the work to say, well, and you have to put in some prayer, frankly. But I think that my commitment is to say, this is what I stand for, and this is what I'm convinced is going to help the country. And I can't ultimately, at the end of the day, if we have the majority of the population wants to vote for certain abortion laws or for gay rights type laws or for gay marriage type laws, if they want to vote for specific type of things or if they want to decriminalize marijuana, I'm not into the decriminalize movement as well. I think that it's caused problems up in Oregon and California, where they've decriminalized cocaine and heroin and marijuana and even theft up to $900 has kind of become a misdemeanor instead of a felony.
You're sort of in favor of laws, enforcing laws.
I'm sort of in favor of not having just complete lawlessness everywhere. Yes.
I'd like to see that on a poster.
Yeah. I mean, I think what a lot of voters fear is that, people get sent to Washington and get pushed around, right? And then don't actually understand what it's like in Washington. And it sounds to me like you're very clear on who you are and what you stand for, and that's not going to be a problem for you, that you're open to having discussions, but that also you feel it as part of the mandate is, if you elect me, this is what we're voting for, and that you're not going to get pushed around.
Yes, and most of the time I feel like I align with Utah, to be honest with you. In general, with the majority of Utah, I would confess there might be times where I would vote for things that, the Respect for Marriage Act, Mike Lee was 1 out of 6 who opposed that. He's 16% of our congressional delegation, and most of the people in Utah might not have been on board. I have respect for him for doing it. I think it was the right vote. I think that sometimes a senator, when he gets there, he will see things from a different viewpoint, kind of like a prophet does in the church. I don't realize all the reasons sometimes that the prophets do what they do, but I have faith and a knowledge that they do receive guidance for their stewardship. And I think as a senator or somebody in DC that's working there full time, with the staff, you're going to get a perspective as well. And the most important thing for me is what is going to help defend our life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, our property. What is going to help build this country so that the people have a higher quality of life, so we have more peace, tranquility, and just a desirable country to live in where people prosper and they reach the American dream. Those are the things that I'm shooting for. And if it's not the same as what my constituents believe in, then hopefully they've vetted me out before they ever vote for me in the first place. But I do think that the views that I have are pretty aligned with Utah in general, and I think our legislature is very aligned with me most of the time as well. There are exceptions. They're in individual members, but So it's an interesting discussion because people will say, I mean, here's another confession. Like, I look back at prohibition in the 1920s or 30s. I think prohibition is good law. That's
Make
going to be
alcohol illegal again, right?
Yeah, I mean the selling, the distribution of it. But I understand that this comes to a vote, and I understand that the people. But my work is to convince the people to say, "Hey, we as a population, I have no question in my mind that we would be better off if we didn't drink or smoke." I mean, it takes 20% of our ICU capacity in our hospitals for drug and alcohol abuse on a perpetual basis. It's just a massive blow to our people's morale and to our economy and to our healthcare costs. Drugs and alcohol have been just an epidemic. I mean, and now it's kind of being compounded. We have some cartels that get paid to illegally human traffic people across the border, and they're bringing more of it. And I'll tell you, we have people who aren't concerned about the welfare of our country, who are kind of pushing it in for their own purposes. And so for me, I think it's good law. I understand that that's probably not, if I could pass it and people were on board with it, that'd be great. But it's a democracy and it's a pluralistic society, and I do understand that. But the problem for me, as I look at it, is not that prohibition was bad law. It's that we had a population who was no longer willing to vote for it, who was no longer willing to enforce it, who was no longer willing to live by it. And thus, I mean, any laws that we put on, they're going to be inadequate for an immoral people, based, Thomas Jefferson. And I believe that. I mean, so that is I consider moral decay to be one of the greatest fights that we have right now in Congress, is to say, hey, we are fighting for the moral fabric of our country, because if we don't, it doesn't matter what laws we pass, they're not going to be adequate for the people. We have to, and I'm not one who thinks that the laws can go and compel us all to be moral people. But at the same time, I do want people to be clear. I have a very difficult time going to the ballot box and teaching something different than what I teach my children at the pulpit. And so I have a very hard time. Like, I know we lived in Colorado briefly. They have legalized marijuana. I wouldn't have voted for it. And I still would oppose that in any state that I live in, and definitely in Utah. And I'm not really planning on moving from here in the near future, but I hope that never comes to that. But for me, that is part of my makeup and part of where I wouldn't compromise. There's certain values that I say, hey, I can't go decriminalize things or change laws in ways that I consider both immoral, and then I also consider them to be provably bad for our society in every other way. I mean, gambling is the same way, and it's different here in Utah. We're one of 2 states that doesn't have legalized gambling, and I believe in it. I think it helps have a bigger middle class, and I kind of see it as cannibalistic and taking advantage of. It's kind of like a regressive taxation. A lot of the gambling, state-run lotteries are paid for by people who are already on, have lower income, and so. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling on now. I know I am. So I'm sorry. But
hey, Josh, it was great to have you. I almost think, is there an issue I didn't hear about?
No. No, it does seem like you are very much aligning your faith with your campaign. And I think that's something that you're uniquely able to do, because I think a lot of people hide from that or don't dare put that forward. But I can definitely see that, like, you are who you are, and you your faith is your faith, and that you're not gonna misalign anything with that to try and get votes or to try and pander to people. Like, you really have a cause and a purpose behind this, and I respect that. I think that's definitely something you've shown us today. Yeah.
When I look in the scriptures of what we should look for in people to vote for, there's a couple of verses that say, when the wicked rule, people mourn. And so we should look for righteous, good, wise people to uphold. And so, for me, when it comes to politics, I care much less about the policies and the particular stances on issues as I do about the person. I think it's really important to have good people. And Josh, I think you're a good person. I mean, I'm not the ultimate judge of character, and we've only spent a little bit of time together, but I really appreciate you taking some time to visit with us today. It's been great to get to know you better.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for taking some time. I mean, we're a shoestring budget campaign, so I mean, we'll take any exposure we can get. And
and it's nice to get to know you as a person too. I think it's always interesting to hear about people's backgrounds and where they come from and where it brings them. So that was really great, Josh. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
If our listeners want to reach out to you, Josh, and get to know more about you or help, what could they do? How could they reach you?
electjoshrandall.com is our website, and Josh for Senate, FOR Senate 2024 at gmail.com. We are pretty good about responding pretty much to everybody who sends emails, and we get a fair amount, but we really try and get back with everybody. We're pretty actively, we're pushing hard. We are campaigning hard. So it's a part-time thing in many ways. I mean, we're not quitting our job, and we're not upturning all of I'm still coaching my kids' basketball team tomorrow morning, and that is, we might miss a little bit of the Box Elder meet and greet that they're having tomorrow in their county GOP. Hopefully we'll make it to whatever we can. Davis County has some tomorrow, and Tooele County has some. But, faith and family, we're trying to keep it in that order. And I hope that every senator who goes over there will keep those priorities too. If nothing else, I want to help maybe change the conversation for whoever becomes a senator to not shelf their faith, even if it's not me. I want them to go there and say, hey, I hope they'll be prayerful. I hope there'll be somebody who is committed to doing what's right, even if it means that he's not popular. I would rather have a senator do that. And so I hope whoever wins will have that goal to do what's right for the country, even if it's not always popular.
Well, thank you so much. We'll have that be the last word. Josh, thanks for joining us. Listener, thanks for joining us. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, guys.